Hi, I am Follygon, a professional digital sculptor, and in this video I'm going to be showing you my entire 3D character creation process from start to finish on my new character, the Ringleader. But before I get in and talk about the digital sculpting process, click that subscribe button if you are new around here, and if you'd like to learn more about digital sculpting, or maybe download my custom brushes, you can get all of that at the link down in the description. So if you are completely new to the world of digital sculpting, what you're seeing on screen might be a little weird, and that terminology itself, digital sculpting, might sound really weird. But digital sculpting is nothing more than a type of high poly 3D modeling. So if you've ever seen, a 3D character in a movie or, some special effects, typically somebody had to make that, right? So somebody like me, except for me specifically, I have not done anything specifically for feature film. I have only professionally worked mostly on toys. I've done some stuff for amusement park figures, museum figures, life-size stuff, and most recently in the past couple years, kind of delved into the video game world a little bit as well. The earliest stages of sculpting, or in this case, digital sculpting, is what is known as a blockout. The blockout is, in my opinion, the most difficult part of the entire sculpting process. The initial shapes, going from that blank canvas to actually having something that you can work with, is a scary stage, and it's also a stage where things can look really, really weird. I always call it the alien phase of sculpting, but it doesn't always look like an alien. Sometimes it does work out and shape up pretty quick. Here, it's sped up, so it goes pretty quick. But for me, it was about 6 times slower as I was creating it. And sometimes when you are looking at some of those really awkward stages, it can be hard to push past that stuff. Specifically with this character, however, it went really smoothly, and that is because I was kind of just sculpting without much intention. The beginning stages of this character, about the first 3 hours of it, I didn't really have, I'm gonna say it, any direction with this sculpt. And that is because on the day that I sculpted the initial blockout that I'll put up on screen right now, kind of how this character started, and I'll also kind of compare that side by side with the finished version. That character on the left there was sculpted over on my Discord channel. So there is a Follygon Discord channel. It's a private Discord. The only way you can get in is either by joining my Patreon for 1 month, and then of course you get lifetime access to it, or by joining my mentorship program, the Appeal Academy. So I don't really have a lot of time for live streaming. It's something that I used to do quite a lot. But with this sculpt, I was coming off of a really busy day, and I kind of just, wanted to chill for a little bit. And what better way to relax than with some sculpting, right? So I hopped into the live chat channel over on my Discord server and started to do some live streaming. And it was a ton of fun. Had a lot of people come in and say hi. If you were one of those, thank you for stopping in and chatting for a little while. That was just a lot of fun, and I definitely want to do that more in the future. So I actually made a masculine character. I see comments a lot, whether here or over on Instagram or TikTok, of people saying, what, do you ever sculpt guys? And I'm like, yeah, I sculpt guys. I sculpt more than just women. I enjoy sculpting all sorts of different characters. I enjoy sculpting animals. I like sculpting a variety of things, but sometimes it can be hard to find my, entire backlog of work. Probably the best way to do that would be, either my Instagram or ArtStation. So Instagram/Follygon or ArtStation/Follygon. So yes, this character was sculpted without a lot of intention. And I just kind of let the polys lead me, so to speak, and started creating some interesting shapes. And I think this face kind of really developed into something visually interesting. I think the body developed into something really interesting as well. And it is something that I would like to play around with more in the future, with this kind of masculine blockout that I had. But after this session of about 3 hours of sculpting, which for me, when I was doing this, it was, very slow sculpting. I normally do sculpt quite a bit faster than what I have here in a few hours. I can typically do a relatively quick full character in 3 hours, but in this case, I wanted to turn this character into a more feminine character. And I started to do that, I feel like, a little bit at the end of this 3-hour process, but it was still feeling a little more masculine than the direction I wanted to go with the character, so I wanted to play with that a lot more. So I definitely do that, and you'll see that kind of start to happen here. But yeah, I did want to talk about the process of these early stages a lot, even though it's kind of speeding by pretty quick. For example, on this body and on this face, like I said, I didn't have a whole lot of intention, and that gives me a lot of room to experiment. Experimenting with character faces, I think, is one of the most fun and interesting things that you can do. There's just so much variety that you can have in a character. And I really try to avoid that kind of same face syndrome, and I'm sure a lot of my characters do look very similar. That is something that I am aware of and I actively try to push away from. So I'm always trying to, experiment as much as I can. The last character that I made was a very different style and aesthetic than what I normally do, and I was very happy with the way that one turned out. This one as well, I was very happy with the way it turned out. And in particular, with faces, when you are experimenting with shapes, it's very easy to push away from human. I would not recommend doing this necessarily unless you have quite a bit of experience working with faces. I mean, you can do whatever you want, I really don't care. But I think you'll get a lot more out of it if you do experiment, if you have that experience for experimenting, that's getting a little too wordy, underneath your belt. So I kind of sculpt a little haphazardly and let the polys kind of lead me, so to speak. So if I see an interesting shape that I like, I start to push on that more and more. Now you can see I'm clearly starting to head into a little more of a feminine direction with the character, starting off with the body. So doing some tapering, obviously adding some breast onto the chest, so getting some fat pads on there, and then of course beginning to adjust and blend some of the other forms together. So you'll notice with these early stages of the blockout, or at least with my process, there are a lot of hard edges on this sculpture, on this character. And that is something that I think, a lot of people could really benefit from. This is just my process. There are tons of sculptors out there that work completely different from me, and they're amazing. They're amazing, amazing sculptors, much better than I am. And, I recommend finding what works for you. This is what I like to do. This is the process that I enjoy. I like having these really hard plane changes that help define where a form is turning, because I want to have hyper control over every shape that I am creating. And I feel like with a rounded form, in my opinion, it's a lot more difficult to achieve that and figure out exactly where your surface is turning or changing directions. When you put in this hard edge, you are concretely saying, hey, no accidents here, this is where I want this, this is where I want this form, this is where I want this to, turn and change directions. And sometimes that can be a scary thing for me. I've been doing it a really long time. But yes, that is kind of my process of how I work. But, after I do all of that, I do eventually need to start making the character feel fleshy, feel organic, and not feel like a freaking Gundam or something, like a mech or a robot. So I continue to push on that as I continue forward. At this point, I have adjusted the character quite a lot, as you can tell, feeling a lot more rounded in terms of shape language, kind of moving away from some of the more masculine or boxy rhythms that I had, or squarish rhythms that I had before. I'm also starting to add on a little bit of hair. I feel like hair is a really good way for you to add character to your character. Hair, color, posing, expression, those are a lot of the things that I really enjoy doing that start to make characters really come alive. Color in particular is definitely one of those things, but hair really helps to set the tone for, the thing that you are creating. If you've ever gotten a new haircut that's completely different, or had a friend do that, and seen them after doing that, they feel like a completely new person sometimes, or you feel like maybe you look completely different. So hair is very important to the character creation process. The way that I like to do hair is the way that I sculpt pretty much anything. Start off with a really messy clump of digital clay, otherwise known as polygons, and throw that around until I start to see a shape that I enjoy. Sometimes I go in with more direction. In this case, I did not. I knew I just wanted longer hair, at least shoulder length. So that is where I started, kind of pulling that down. I actually, after playing around with it, decided to do half of her head shaved. I thought that that was a really cool look. Some things are kind of happy accidents as I build them. Some things I go in with a plan. This character was definitely not a whole lot of planning. This was more so me doing a ton of experimenting and trying to find something that I visually enjoyed. And hopefully you guys visually enjoy the character I create as well. If not, maybe you can learn something cool from me talking a little bit about my process here. So the face goes through a ton of renditions. And if you remember, I mentioned that during the early phase, I like to put in these hard edges. And then later on, I get rid of them and I make the character feel more organic. Well, to reassess my character, I will often go back in and put those hard edges and make sure that I am really in control of the shapes that I am creating. This face is going to change a lot as I work on it. It is going to go from feeling more masculine to more feminine, going from feeling like an ancient hag to a young child, and everything in between. So this is just kind of my process as I go through and experiment and try to find exactly the character that I want to create. It's not the most clean route necessarily, but I get there in the end, I think. After creating the main shape for my hair, I like to go back over top of that with my own custom clay brush. There's a link to my online store down below if you want to grab them. But I'll just add on a little form over top of that, kind of flowing down the general direction of the hair, trying to get a feel for what are called secondary forms. Secondary forms are anything on top of, you might have guessed it, a primary form, or essentially that blockout. So after I do that, I start just cleaning up what I'm creating, trying to refine and better understand exactly what the flow of these secondary shapes is going to look like. So that is when I go over top of it with my custom mech brush or some form of a pinch brush. I have a couple different pinch brushes that I really enjoy using. There I was specifically using my mech brush, and that is something that I use quite a lot in my sculpting process. It's kind of become a little bit of an all-around brush for me for just controlling shapes. I'll also go through my sculpt here from time to time and just reassess my proportions and make sure that, her head isn't twice as big as it would, we would normally expect, or, her eyes aren't crazy small or crazy big or whatever. I'm doing that a little bit with the ears and arms, making sure that things fit within a standard of believability, while also adjusting and fixing some anatomical forms. So some areas like the head feeling too tall, or specifically the pectoralis and how that kind of hooks into your humerus or your upper arm. After a while, I go through and start to add some paint onto my character in ZBrush, which is the software that I'm using, if I have not yet mentioned. Also, it says it in the top left corner of the screen if you're observant. So polypaint, or what is actually technically called vertex color. I like to go through and paint my characters pretty strongly. Ironically, I often call this my clown painting pass. And at this point, I did not know that I was going to make her or give her some clown makeup at the end. Not necessarily a clown, but I did give her some clown makeup. The reason why I call this my clown painting pass is because I will typically overpaint the heck out of it and exaggerate a lot of the paint and make it really strong. And then later on, I will knock back that color and kind of, desaturate and neutralize some of the values. I do that a little bit later on after I go ahead and, of course, paint the eyes here, which is a pretty simple process. I pretty much hand paint everything here. I don't use any textures or anything like that, nor do I use any fancy brushes for painting. I pretty much only use the standard brush with an RGB intensity of, I used to say set it to like 5 or 10, but anymore, some changes that they've made to the most recent version of ZBrush, 2021, requires some stronger RGB intensity. So I do about 25 now. I'm not exactly sure why that happened, but it's a little annoying sometimes, or at least the paintbrush acts a little differently than I remember it. After painting the eyes, I go back to reassessing my face again, pinching up some planes, making sure things are making sense, and then of course using a lot of different functionality in ZBrush that ZBrush users out there that are watching this I'm sure are very familiar with, such as Dynamesh and Z-Remesher. If you are looking for some really nice remeshing tips, I would definitely recommend this video up in the top right-hand corner of the screen. My number one tip for all ZBrush users. It's a really good video if you are looking to have more control over your form. And who's not looking to have more control over the shapes that they are trying to create? So at this point, I've created some simple clothing for her, although it does go through quite a few adjustments later on. I also have started creating some jewelry, obviously that earring and necklace, and I've started to play around with some of the fabric, or the way I'm going to frame the body and face essentially. And obviously that changes a lot as I go through this process as well. The neck for the character was actually looking a little awkwardly long when I was looking at the character earlier. And instead of making it shorter, I just decided to add this kind of almost turtleneck or long neck fabric top piece. I don't know what you would necessarily call this, but that helped to really frame the face very nicely. And I played around with adding some ruffles to the top of that fabric because I really enjoyed the way it looked, and it really helped frame in around the face very nicely. I played around with a lot of variations on this kind of ruffle shape that I create here, but it turned out that the first one I created ended up being my favorite. And ironically, the first one I kind of applied a little bit haphazardly or accidentally. And then I tried to go back in and like control it more, and I was like, none of this is working, this is all terrible. I'll just use the one that kind of just happened on a happy whim or happy accident. Sometimes happy accidents actually happen. I know I talk a lot about, controlling my form when I'm sculpting, but yes, sometimes I do have some happy, nice, random things happen for me. I don't remember the exact mental gymnastics my brain made, gymnastics not trying to be punny there, but I don't remember exactly what happened in my noggin to get me to experiment with clown paint. It must have just been something with the ruffles around the neck started to make that feel a little bit like it was heading in the direction of a clown. So from here, I started to look up some images of common clown paint and played around with some different ideas there, specifically with shape and color. I felt like black, which was what I tried first, made the face feel too dark. I didn't want the piece to feel really dark. Just physically, I didn't want the framing of the face to have a lot of this dark color kind of hiding or concealing a lot of the form that I worked very hard on. So I felt like the white was a better route to go there. I also liked the red circles or rosy cheeks that I had there. Interestingly enough, I actually used geometry for those shapes of paint on the face at first. I do this very often as it is very nice and easy to control, but later on I go back in and paint over my final face for my character. Next up, moving on to some clothing. Or more work on the clothing, I should say. Starting to just form fit that to the character a little bit better, as I had made some proportional changes and things weren't lining up quite as nicely as I had them before. I'll often use masks and extractions to create my clothing, but I have my own kind of way of going about that, as I don't really enjoy the default extraction functionality in ZBrush. Maybe I can make a tutorial on that in the future. But I do turn this character into a bust. You might be wondering why, if I am going to, or know that I'm going to make this character into a bust, why do I sculpt the entire, torso or create extra? And the reason for that is because if I'm going to kind of like slice or chop it off, I want to have that form kind of look like it would be flowing into the rest of that in an organic way. And if I just kind of chop it off and try to kind of finagle it into position at first, it's a lot harder. Then on to experimenting with a little function called micropoly. This essentially takes a mesh that you can create or use some of the defaults and you can replace that with individual polygons. So, polygon is that little square that you'll see on occasion when I am adjusting my form here. But yeah, micropoly is really cool. I would definitely recommend playing around with it if you use ZBrush and if you've never experimented with the functionality before. But I use it specifically to create this meshy-like fabric. I also use it on the necklace to create some kind of metallic kind of chain link there as well. Then after experimenting with the clothing for a little bit, it is up to the face to experiment with expression. I knew that I wanted to go in a more sad route, but I was very wary not to go into kind of quizzical. Expression's very difficult because the slightest amount of change to your eyes and mouth can make a huge difference to how your character looks and feels. I often joke around that if you want to give your character a very quick expression, and I recommend for all of you that enjoy looking at art, and specifically character art, the next time you're looking at a character, look for this expression. Just one eyebrow raised up on a character. It is the most quick and simple expression you can give a character with very, very little work. And tons of artists know and use this trick, including me. So with this expression, I did not head in that route, although I did sculpt each brow individually. I find that at this stage, I want to sculpt what is called asymmetrically, essentially non-symmetrically, to avoid having the face feel too perfect. I like to keep things nice and clean and as, quote, perfect as I can, but at the same time, I don't want the character to feel completely unbelievable, completely perfectly symmetrical. That often comes off as a little uncanny. So a little asymmetry at the end can go a long way, in particular with your expression. Even if you plan on, making both sides of the face very similar, if not exactly the same, I would recommend doing it asymmetrically at the end there to add a little extra character or a little unevenness to either side of the face. I also take time at this stage to make any corrections that I see need to happen. And I also do all of these asymmetrically, as I feel that, I'm typically going to make the same changes on both sides of the face at this point if I see something that needs fixing, but going through and doing it one side at a time, again, just adds that little extra grain of character. Everything at this stage moving forward is what I like to call polish or kind of finishing touches. And that involves adding things like stray strands of hair. So tiny little hairs that help to draw your attention to specific areas, namely right around the framing of the face. But of course, before I add in those little hairs, I need to add some texture to the surface of my hair to keep it from looking too flat. To start off with that, I like to use my Folly Sharp Soft brush, and then I'll go back over top of that with my mech or pinch brush. I also like to smooth out a lot of forms here and think about a little fundamental called stroke quality. This is the exact same idea as line weight in two-dimensional drawing, which is something that I've been experimenting with a lot lately. But the basic idea is to avoid a line or an edge feeling exactly the same throughout its entire stroke. So I will often pinch an entire stroke, kind of very gently pressing with my Wacom pen, and then lifting up at the end as I kind of follow through with the stroke, and that helps to add some extra variation to your brush stroke. Then I'll go back over top of that with some smoothing and start to define and blend and make that feel a little more unique. There are those stray strands of hair that I mentioned earlier. These are always, in my opinion, with my style in particular, less tends to be more. The, adding of a lot of these can make your hair kind of feel like spaghetti, and if you don't add enough, it can feel a little awkward if you just have like one or two. So I try to add a few of these in a couple specific areas to help bring attention typically to the eyes, and you'll see I'll add in one more that helps to achieve that a little better than what I have right now. But before I do that, I need to go ahead and paint my character's face. And for this, I start off by using a mask, specifically a mask lasso. A mask is a feature that allows you to prevent yourself from working on specific areas of your 3D model. In this case, I do it so that I can paint a very specific shape. And even at this stage, as I am painting, you'll see that I kind of experiment with some different ideas. I start by making those dots at the end of the triangles black, but I go back through later and make those white. I also start adding some freckles at this point. I thought that this character would look really cute with some freckles. There are some stencils or textures that you could use for freckles. I am not really a huge fan of the way that those look a lot of the time, and I feel like they can look very automated or very much done by some kind of, they can look like they're done by a computer. And I don't want that feeling. I want it to look like, I put a lot of effort into hand painting them. And that's because I did, right? I also play around with making the paint feel a little runny underneath the eyes. Because I wanted to have this sad expression and, either maybe she just, got done crying or, just dried her tears or something like that. And I thought that the runny paint would help, sell that more sad expression a little bit better. For this, all I did was continue using the exact same paintbrush, a standard brush, and repaint the color of my skin and kind of use the smooth brush to just blend the paint slightly at the edges. Nothing really complicated, it just takes some control. And then one of my coup de grace, my finishing touches here, is that last stray strand of hair right in front of the character's right brow. That helps to, again, bring more attention into the eyes. After doing that, I take my character and I export it to Blender, set up some lights, a camera, and render the character. For this character in particular, I set up some nice colorful backlights as I thought that kind of fit the more clown-like aesthetic or theme. And I gave her some harsher shadows to indicate more of a spotlight feel, but honestly, I don't like using super hard shadows on my characters simply because I'm trying to represent a soft or rounded character here, and that kind of goes directly against that. And without further ado, here is the final render for the character. I hope that you guys enjoyed the video, getting to check out some of my process along the way. Whether you are a 3D artist yourself or not, I hope that you enjoyed the video, maybe learned something new. If you did, click that like and subscribe button. I make videos just like this one all the time. And check out the links down below for things like my Patreon, which is where you can get a ton of awesome tutorials, get a behind the scenes look at what I'm working on, as well as hang out with me in the Follygon Discord. And if you'd like to learn how to create characters directly from me, you can check out my mentorship program, The Appeal Academy. I actually just had 2 students finish up their entire mentorship program. Here are their characters. They're going to be working on them more, but I just wanted to show off their current progress right now. That is going to be it for this video. Thank you to everyone that has stayed here to the very end. I appreciate you guys watching, and I will catch you in the next video.